Jarek Kutylowski is the CEO and founder of DeepL, a company that most recently raised at a $2 billion valuation and supports over 100,000 businesses in AI translation worldwide. We had a really interesting conversation on supervised learning, including his take on why specialized models will beat generalized models, his view on what the world looks like when we have synchronous speech translation so anybody can understand anyone else, and whether people will learn more or less languages in the future. We talked about how they beat Google and their approach to building their own data centers versus using hyperscalers, and we also hit on data labeling and why they've chosen to do it in-house. I think folks are really going to enjoy this episode. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jacob. It's great being here.
I mean, I guess to kick things off, I think one thing that's so interesting about DeepL is you've obviously been doing a lot of cutting edge AI research long before it was cool and in vogue and the thing of the moment. I'm wondering what it was like inside the company as this kind of, excitement started to crescendo, and maybe we'll go specifically to the moment of ChatGPT being released and everyone starting to play around with this. Like, what was that day like in DeepL?
We definitely felt the excitement at this point in time. That really was a day. I think we really knew what the technology itself can accomplish. In fact, we've been building language models before too. They've been part of our translation solutions for quite a while. So from an academic perspective, that hasn't been that much of a surprise. But I think it has still been a big surprise in how magic that has felt. And how it also really worked for the awareness and educating a general public about what we are doing and about what AI is doing. And then in terms of the competition in the market, we've been up against Google Translate since the beginnings of DeepL. And what that has really taught us is competition is good. It really creates the best outcome for the user. And we've integrated that into this company DNA. And I think it really has been helping me to even run the company. And at the end, it is about the best outcomes for our customers and keeping it in the back of our minds that there are other pretty huge players in the market. That has been a driving force for us and has been always creating this sense of urgency. I don't think that AI translation would be where it is right now without DeepL coming into that space. But also the same kind of moment was there with LLM technology coming up. It is amazing. It allows us to bring the next level of translation to our users.
What are some examples of that?
Yeah, think of the translation not being the simple use case of where you throw in a document and get a document out of that. Think of you want to have a colleague, somebody sitting next to you working on the translation and perfecting it. And while people tend to want at the beginning to just use AI translation to quickly translate something and get an output of that, they also at some point in time come to this idea of, hey, I want to personalize. I want to make it better. I want to work with the AI, figure out something that is going to be mine. It's not going to be like an average translation of the internet. It's going to be really my translation. And then kind of getting that paired and getting a little bit more of this interactivity between the human and the AI. I think that is something that is much easier nowadays with the LLMs having come into that space.
Do you have a go-to prompt that you use to figure out, because obviously translation is so nuanced, and I'm sure there's some sentences that, any large language model at this point can translate well, and others that there's nuance in how each language works. Like when you're testing a new, when GPT-4 comes out or GPT-5 or whatever, is there a kind of go-to that you use to figure out hey, do these models yet understand the nuances of how to say something in German versus English versus French?
We have been testing sets of those, honestly, and trying to figure out what are the best ones and how that really changes also the outcome. I think when you think about those prompts, or if you would think about that, then it's really about what you want to achieve there. Is it more about getting the most accuracy out of that, or getting most out of the fluency out there? All of that is kind of baked in our models by default. So they try to figure out what kind of text are you writing? Is it a more technical text, and therefore it is appropriate to go for full accuracy? Or is it more marketing, and therefore it would be better to just optimize for native language?
Maybe a good segue just to talk a little bit about the DeepL product for our listeners, maybe just, and also I think the different use cases you see for translation. I think this idea of, you were kind of alluding to it, and there's the technical side, there's the marketing side, but maybe just how you think about the different buckets of what people want in their translations.
Yeah, translation is super broad. And while we are on this like very general mission to solve these kind of language and translation problems, specifically really for businesses, and obviously with AI all of the time. But I mean, at the end, it's only 18% of the world which speaks English. Even in the US, which is like probably the biggest English speaking region, 20% of people speak languages other than English at home. And kind of helping companies to seamlessly communicate across these languages, that's going to make their operations both internally much better and much more efficient, but also helps them to go into new markets. And this is pretty much the two big kind of spaces that we see DeepL being employed in. And the use cases and the industries may vary quite a lot. It's everything from law firms, manufacturing, retail, media, government, pretty much name it. Translation is so broad. But what you'd usually see the most is high-value use cases where accuracy, quality matters. And just giving you maybe like two examples, like for kind of the external side of things, Nikkei, major media company, they own the Financial Times, but they're based out of Japan. They're using DeepL to translate thousands of their articles across Japanese, English, and Chinese to reach a whole new set of readers, pretty much, both internally in Japan, but also outside in the world where people want to get informed about what's happening in Japan. And then, like if you look in the internal use case, it's very often multinational, big companies. They're located in different countries, which are quite often in highly regulated industries where like you have a document coming in German, but actually the specialist for tackling that kind of legal contract is sitting in the US. And how do you make that work? Or like a Japanese car manufacturer that we're working with, they have all of their R&D in Japan, but their customers actually sit in Europe and in the US. And you want to make sure that the information flow on what your customers want, what they're asking about, influence the roadmaps, the development of the products. And for that, you really have to have this very seamless communication patterns between those different countries and offices.
One thing I think is just super interesting, and maybe to ask it directly, is like, how did Google not win this category? Like you look back at the original Transformer paper, and I think the example they had was like a translation of like French to English, right? And so obviously this has been something that they've been thinking about a lot. I think it's very relevant to today because people will look at lots of problems and they'll say, God, that incumbent is just so well positioned in that space. You've clearly been a huge success story. Like, what do you attribute, like, what happened as this market unfolded? I'm sure when you were pitching folks in 2017, there were lots of people that were like, yeah, Google's just going to figure this out. Like, how did this kind of unfold to get to the position where you are today?
A very quick answer, being fast to the market, I would say, and then keeping the pace on that and like really keeping innovating. And making that answer a little bit longer, I think it really comes down to building this strong academic level research within the company, but also being able to specialize on a particular use case. And for us, that's really like this translation use case, but high value use cases for businesses. But then I think also like an important part of that, really, the fact that we have been established in Europe. I mean, right now we've grown to a pretty global company, but like being at the center of so many different languages, like when I live 50 kilometers or half an hour drive from Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. So like there's so many different languages around. I think that makes the team understand the problem and makes the team also be like really motivated for solving that problem. And especially with like engineering research, we should not underestimate the power of motivation to solve something that is meaningful and like really important to people and users.
And I guess to that point, maybe like, how do you think about for your research team, the stuff that you guys focus on, and then the stuff that you're like, like the underlying model providers are pouring billions of dollars into training these general models. Like we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Like, well, when it comes to research today, like, how do you guys think about like, these are the areas we should be spending time in versus the areas that, it makes sense to just essentially outsource to folks who are spending money on your behalf?
Yeah, I mean, We are a very much build-it-yourself company. I think from that perspective, and that it once again comes back, I think, to the early days of where things just haven't been there when we have started building. But not only models, but like even the tooling on or data centers or any of that, that just wasn't there. But also, like, I do think and I do believe that having like the ownership of this whole vertical stack from the product, like even starting at the go-to-market, the product, the engineering of that, and then the research, it really allows you to kind of trickle down the problems very well, and being able to figure out things that you maybe cannot do if you just do prompt engineering. But if you have like all of the models parameters, the training, the architecture, all of that in your control, and also understand very well how those models work, you can figure out somehow better on how to put these pieces together, and how at the end to figure out a customer's problem and how to solve it.
Well, I think that's so compelling. And we've heard from a lot of folks that basically, this combination of kind of doing your own research, making your own models, and then after deploying an application, that feedback loop just gets really tight and allows you to kind of build a better, more tailored product. Are there any examples of that come to mind where you're like, if we were just prompt engineering, we never would have been able to fix X or, do Y in the product? Like, love an example of that feedback loop maybe between the application out in the wild and then tweaking something on the model side.
Sure. I think what we've built in terms of like the ability for our customers to embed terminology in the models is a good example of that. Like, we've been running that for years already, and like none of the other translation providers have been able to integrate it in such a good way. And it's like a crucial thing for a lot of businesses, because they want to control the kind of language that their employees or their products, that their like tech manuals are using, and you can therefore like influence the translation there. But it's not really an easy task, because you have to like all of the time make sure that you follow all of the grammatical rules, even if you're kind of replacing some words. You have to make sure that maybe sometimes, even if the customer has said translate A with B always, maybe sometimes it really doesn't make sense, because that word A has two different meanings, and in that sense, you don't want to do it here.
And is that like is that logic all encoded kind of in a big model, or do you have like a series of smaller models that you're like chaining together? Like, how does it kind of all work under the hood?
We run different sets of models. I mean, depending also really on languages and language pairs, and also given the different data sizes that are available for different language pairs, like there's going to be much more translated material available for German English, for example, comparing to Polish English. The model sizes might differ too, and then you might sometimes like group models into certain areas, because the languages are similar to each other, and the models can learn from each other there. Or you might even like operationally bundle models together, because it's going to be easier to just purely run on the infrastructure that you have.
No, it must be such an interesting challenge for your team, to your point of just having, for the different language translations you're doing, there's just such different size data sets, right? And so you probably can run a much bigger parameter model for German English than Polish English. And obviously I think it sounds like, I could imagine a world in the future where these models learn so much about the inherent basis of language that you'd run it all through one big model, because the German English model benefits from the Polish English model. But it sounds like maybe we're not quite there yet, and it's still helpful to have kind of models that are specific to, a language-to-language pair.
Or you might just have smaller models than at this point in time, which like from an inference compute point of view, and that is definitely, just given the scale that we are operating at, something that we're looking at always, it might make more sense to have slightly smaller models which are handling individual language pairs.
That makes total sense. You don't need a model that can write Shakespeare sonnets to do your scientific publication translation.
Exactly, yeah.
Super interesting. I guess I'd love to understand, it seems like you still use, a lot of human translators kind of in and around the DeepL offering. Maybe just talk about that a little bit, like where it fits in today, how that's evolved over time, and then, how you see that evolving, I guess, over the next decade.
Mm-hmm. I think the influence of human data has been rising all of the time. And I think it's going to only be getting more and more important. I mean, we've seen with the building and the development of LLMs, reinforcement learning, like really kind of coming up, and we've been even running big data annotation kind of projects and tasks, like something that Scale, like Scale AI, of course, having built a great business out of that. We've been running that internally for years already with like human translators for them to help us both train the models on how do we want the translation really to look like, but also looking at the quality assurance of that. And I think that is like extremely important for these kinds of specialized models that we are building, comparing maybe to like the very general ones. You really always, like, your customers have a high expectation on quality and a high expectation on the quality being like steady all of the time. So your quality assurance needs also to be top notch. So a lot of human translators we're working with, kind of the interesting and exciting part of that is being, you really want to have people who speak the language very, very, very well. So you're hiring across the whole globe. You want to have the Brazilian Portuguese native speaker doing the Brazilian Portuguese translation, really. So that makes it really exciting. Sometimes also a bit challenging and complicated in terms of hiring. But I think that is necessary right now, and that will also remain very much a central area of what we're doing.
I mean, it seems like data labeling is one of those things that obviously makes models so much better. And I imagine a lot of companies right now are thinking, do we is that something that we should have in-house? Do we partner with like Scale or Surge or some of these other folks? Like, obviously you guys have made the decision to do it in-house for now. Like, how do you think about that generally? Do you think that's what will mostly unfold for folks building kind of specialized models like yourself? Or like, I guess, does Scale and Surge keep supporting just kind of open AI level efforts? Or what happens I'm sure we'll see many more companies like you over the next few years. You think they do it in-house, or they use some of these vendors?
I mean, disclaimer up front, we are starting to also thinking about outsourcing parts of that. So it's probably not that clear of an answer even for us. The thing is, it depends really how much control do you want to have around that whole process, and how much the quality is important for the task that you're doing. And I think that's going to be really different depending on which data labeling task you have. For some of them, maybe it's going to be better to just have a huge pile of data, but like the quality being like at some kind of lower level. Whereas for some of those, you really want to have a small set with like the best possible quality, and the ability to even kind of particularly choose single individuals which are doing these jobs and which are working on your tasks. That is going to influence the quality all of the time. And like, if we've seen people who've been performing very, very well at those tasks, but then fell sick for a week, and the quality dropped for a week, and then they got back to that. So if you're keeping in close touch with that, you can much better sort out those instances and make sure that you always have the data that is required for your own task.
I feel like there's obviously this initial wave of data labeling was kind of just like a bunch of data, that was kind of maybe broadly applicable, and now it's such a rush to get specialized data. And so I think it'll be interesting to see whether this high quality specialized data, which is clearly what people want now, if folks like yourself are best suited to both identify who those people are, and then also, to your point, continually analyze like, hey, are we still at the quality bar, or does that end up happening at the data labeling company level?
And maybe even keeping the funnel of those, like finding those people. Selecting them and then making sure that you understand what quality their work has, and that you get to a common understanding of what the work should really be. But also, even like, as I said, starting at the beginning, you have to find people for that. And that is a large hiring endeavor, quite a lot.
Totally. I can imagine that part one might want to outsource, but certainly you guys have such a good perspective on what a high quality translation looks like that it's hard to outsource that part. Another thing that's really interesting to me about, since you've been building in this space for so long, is I think a big question a lot of builders have now is just, it feels like I could build something to get around the holes that models have today. But in 2 years, as the models get better, like that stuff that I built might be irrelevant. And maybe I should have just sat on a beach and waited for GPT-5 to come out and then built that. I'm sure over the years of building DeepL, there's like plenty of things you built to make the product work that now, are not needed because these models have gotten better. How do you think about, I guess any reflections on the stuff that you have built? And then today, how do you think about that? Like plugging the holes, I guess, these models have versus knowing that they're probably going to get better. And, how do you allocate resources around that?
It depends a little bit on what kind of company you want to build. And I think for a company that wants to be cutting edge and that wants to be innovative in a way, this train of thought is really dangerous that you just described. If you want to be at the forefront, you have to innovate. And that really means throwing away a lot of results. Some of those being deprecated by kind of competition and somebody coming in with a model that maybe solves it all, as you said. But sometimes it's like really even your own research. Like you figure out, okay, this idea doesn't work. The other idea works much better. I think research is actually based on these iterations, and it's not only the probability of finding a great solution with everything that you do, but even with every failed attempt on creating a new model architecture or whatever, you gain a better understanding of the problem, which allows you to get to the next level. Like very rarely you can go from here to here without failing a few times in between. You have to just go those tedious steps. And I see that there might be like this inclination to be like financially responsible and cut such investments, or as you said, like go to Hawaii and drink a coffee. But I don't believe that you can build an innovative company this way. Like maybe like call it founder mode on the research side or something like that. You have to have those convictions, I think.
Well, I'm glad we got our founder mode shout out in there. It makes us officially a venture sponsored podcast.
Perfect.
Is there like an example of a failed experiment you ran that you feel like taught you something that like actually ended up being super valuable in the product?
Like obviously on the research front, like it's hundreds and hundreds of experiments there. I think one bigger project that we've experimented around with, and that has been part of the translation industry kind of for years, was the idea of kind of building custom models for individual customers. That has been something that historically has been done because it pretty much was the only possibility to reach certain quality levels before AI translation came up, and maybe like in the very early years of that. And we've been trying to figure out ways on how to do that in a scalable way, in a repeatable way, where you don't have to have like an AI engineer working on a particular customer's problem, or a customer not having the need to hire people for that. I think what we've learned through that is that really the overall quality of the models and the ability of translation models that are just out of the box has surpassed any gains that you could get from that, and all of this additional hassle just really doesn't make so much sense, and you can't get to a scalable level there.
Makes total sense. What do you think of like OpenAI's new O1 model? Like when that comes out, I assume you start thinking of all the things that paradigm of model could do in your world. What was your reaction to it?
I think the reasoning part probably makes like it kind of underlies all of the translation, because the ability for models to understand what's going on out there in the world obviously makes them better to translate. You have to know what you're talking about in order to translate really very well. But at the end, like the reasoning part is probably not at the core of what is so important for translation itself. So probably a slightly less exciting update actually from our perspective than what we've seen over the other years.
Are there model capabilities that would be meaningful to you? It's like, I assume you're eagerly awaiting, a model that can do, X or Y. Like what are the things that you'd be like, wow, if GPT-5 or 6 was able to do this, that would be such a game changer for the DeepL product?
Yeah, I think what I'm really most excited about is if we can come to a state where we can do more with less compute. I mean, we are like right now in this very like with this game of like investing more and more compute into all of the models that we're doing, and that's obviously bringing a lot of results. But it's like, to me, it feels it's a bit too much brute force. maybe we can just do our models a little bit smarter, kind of work on the architectures. Like we've seen over, like with Transformer coming up, we've seen how much architectures, not only compute, can make a difference to what the capabilities of models are. And I think like maybe even the big Gen AI players right now are not really necessarily incentivized to invest into smaller models, as they have this kind of monopoly on huge compute. And it's maybe down to players like us to somehow figure out ways of how to do things slightly more with slightly less compute.
You're obviously using such large scale, and so I think you have had an early look into some of the infrastructure required to do this. What have you kind of learned, I guess, over, like, I'm sure you guys have gotten way better at this. So any advice for folks that maybe will hopefully be getting to your scale at some point in the next years? And then, as we think about the landscape of tools that are and aren't available, where do you think like there are good solutions to support this, and where are you like, oh God, I really wish there was someone building something to help me with X, because it's annoying when you get to the scale we're at?
I wish there were more folks building GPUs or GPU-like solutions.
You and me both.
Like everybody out there. So that's one point. I think when looking at like some kind of advice, like be conscious about where you want to run your loads. I think especially at the beginnings and in the current state of the market, hyperscalers are great, and using them as a kickstart is definitely a good idea. But then if you come to scale, maybe try to think about your own data centers. I mean, we've been operating them since the beginning, but that was a clear and easy choice for us because there was nothing available else for us. The options are different right now, but even when it comes to cost and your cost efficiency, there is a lot of advantages of running your own. And in general, I think that the kind of the platform that we have right now for GPU compute, like the overall tooling that's out there, it's still at pretty early stages, and that compute is really rare. So if you think about general purpose CPU compute, while we've seen a lot of progress in cloud computing, and we've been building sophisticated abstraction layers, one on top of the other, that didn't cost us so much, right? I mean, like, CPUs are pretty cheap. You can run those virtual machines on virtual machines with a high level language on top of that, some kind of general purpose engine. That's all fine. That's all sustainable. If you think from a GPU perspective, I think we are kind of far more early with that. Compute is scarce. It is so powerful, and therefore, if you want to have this big scale, you want to run things sustainably, like honestly, both from an environmental but also commercial point of view, and then you have to optimize there. So kind of think of what you can do and what you can't do there.
It sounds like along the journey, you obviously early on had to build your own data centers. Now there's better offerings from the hyperscalers. If that had kind of existed in the early days of DeepL, like when do you think is actually the right moment in the company's history, if the hyperscaler options have been available, to transition to your own? And how do you think about that for other companies today as they're thinking about when to partner with hyperscalers versus build their own?
Yeah, I think for the big loads that we have right now, like kind of for our research and like the massive inference loads, like even with our free service, we won't switch even now, just because of the cost aspect, and also something that I didn't mention earlier. Like, it's also sometimes about hardware availability. Like, if you want to run and train on the newest hardware available, then you're just going to be so much faster to the market if you run your own data centers. So there's still a lot of virtue to that. I think what nobody should forget is kind of which cost that really also incurs in terms of your development speed and all of that. Like running your own is just so much more complicated. And we're moving large parts of our stack towards hyperscalers, towards the hybrid cloud, and only kind of cutting out what needs to be run for either efficiency reasons or maybe even like for security and data protection requirements from our customers, what needs to remain on premise with our own data centers.
Super interesting. I feel like, some people that aren't deep in translation like you are might look at like AI translation and be like, this is like a solved problem. It feels like it's like solved. I'm sure, I know it's far from that, but like, how would you articulate, I guess, like where we are today in terms of, AI translation generally, and like, does it, where doesn't it work? And then, I guess, what's your kind of estimated timeline for when this becomes a solved problem?
I think quality really differs depending on which language pair you're looking at. And that's both good and bad. I mean, you have those language pairs that are usually the most used in the world, which actually work very well because you have a lot of training data available for those, and also everybody focuses a little bit on creating those. So as with overall model capabilities, depending on language, the same for translation. The more data you have, the better things here really are, and I think then, in terms of the use cases, you can do a lot right now already with translation. I mentioned like newspaper articles being translated automatically without any human supervision after the fact. Like definitely any kind of one-to-one communication, like sending out an email or something like that. I would totally say that this is for the best resourced languages, this is really solved very, very well by now. If you think about kind of publishing your marketing website and you're a billion-dollar company, maybe having like somebody in the loop there to check on that is gonna make a lot of sense. If you're building an operating manual for a nuclear power plant, I think it also makes sense to not even have someone who's gonna be watching out for the quality, but somebody who's going to take like the responsibility and the accountability for the final result. I mean, this is kind of this generic problem that we're getting with AI. I mean, it helps us create a lot of unload a lot of our work, but at the same time, we got to be really cautious about who's at the end responsible for that. And as a last point, I think we still have like much more potential for like kind of how the user experience and how this interaction with the AI can look like in translation.
How do you evaluate models? Like as you're building your own models and they're getting better, like I guess, how do you know, it seems like in some sense there's probably just like objectively, like, did you say the right word? But it seems like a lot of translation is somewhat subjective too. Like think about different translations of works of literature. There's like people like, they're all correct, but people like one, find it much more beautiful than another. Like, how do you solve, or what have you learned, I guess, too, about doing evaluations over the years?
Yeah, I think that's the part where, like in business, it's maybe like a little bit easier. Even
I guess that's fair. You're not translating the Odyssey. You're doing the nuclear power plant manuals.
But like, I mean, literature that's tricky because I think the translation itself is a work of art on its own. I mean, it's really not about the accuracy, and it's sometimes even not about the fluency of the language and how native that feels for somebody who's been living in that country for years. It's quite often about what does it mean from a linguistic point of view, and I think nobody in translation or like in AI translation is looking at that really as a problem or optimizing any kind of model over that. But in general, like evaluation, that's been quite a journey. I would say, like as we started in 2017, like synthetic evaluations like Blue Score, that was what was state of the art for translation. And the problem is like we very, very, very quickly have reached a level of translation quality which those metrics cannot really capture.
There's a problem in every part of AI right now.
Yeah. But I think like here we've been like very early at this stage already, and like there's still a place for these kinds of metrics, like when you're training models to get like a rough orientation where you are, and like there's been obviously like iterations on some of those scores. They've been getting better. But at the end, like the real test is always human evaluation and what we're doing. And once again, this thousands of translators that we're working in that come into play, and like they're judging those translations on kind of how accurate they are, how nuanced, how native they feel, but also always in kind of a comparative way. Like always relating like the next gen model or competition or some kind of other model, getting an absolute level of this translation is 97 and this one is 85. You can't get that really. Like, it's too unspecific for that.
Makes sense. I mean, I think, I feel like one of everyone's favorite topics in AI today is like, talking about moats and defensibility. And, I feel like we wouldn't be a venture podcast if we didn't talk about that. And so, I mean, I'm curious because, well, one, obviously specific to your industry, but also just generally, like there's so many AI startups coming out now. And, I think they're facing their own, behemoths that seem well positioned for this stuff. Like how do you think about that? Like, I guess there's a spectrum of folks being like, none of this matters. It's just like shipping fast and doing right by customers and like, who cares? And then the other folks that are like, look, there's some spaces that you might be better positioned than others to actually, as a startup. You've obviously lived this, like, and I'm sure you've heard all this discourse about moats and defensibility and your investor pitches and whatnot. Like, how do you think about this whole talk track?
Yeah, best question ever. I think, like really from our perspective, it's a lot about those specialized models versus very, very general ones. And I think if you think about the ecosystem more broadly, there is definitely very many areas where it's just like financially doesn't make so much sense to build specialized solution for those. It's maybe like the long tail of use cases, and you cannot afford to kind of buy a Blackwell cluster for training those within your own company. You will have to kind of base off standard technology. When it comes to those like super big use cases that you have in the world, and I think translation is indisputably one of those, specialized models really make a lot of sense. And what you can build through that is really this ready-made solution, and a solution that like vertically integrates. We've heard this so often from our customers, like we don't want to run POCs internally. We want to have something that just we plug it in, it works. Our employees know it maybe the best already because they've been using that for the consumer use cases. We just go for it. We roll. Not a big deal. And that's been always a question in tech, I think, and with software companies. The companies with the better products have won. I think it's even a bigger question right now with the advance of like general AI, which can do everything, but it's actually pretty complicated to get it do this task reliably in a way.
Totally. I mean, I feel like this is the big question, right? Like, what general purpose LLMs as they get better and better, what spaces do they subsume is just because they are learning things across different domains. And obviously it seems like what you're finding on the ground is actually, it turns out, a model that's just trained on the translation side with really good labeled reinforcement learning on that really outperforms a model that can do a ton of different things. And I'm sure it will be really interesting to see how that develops over the years. Yeah.
I mean, that is basically the essence of that. Yeah.
What's next for DeepL? Like, I'm obviously, I'm sure you guys have big ambitions. What do you think about like building down the line? Obviously, there's some ancillary areas to what you do. Like, there's writing, there's speaking. I guess, how do you think about where DeepL goes in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously like this part of like general translation quality, like making it even for like even maybe the smaller language pairs. Like, let's not forget about those countries out there. But I think like you touched upon one of the big points for me, and this is really spoken language and voice. I think this is gonna be like the next frontier in kind of translation and where we are right now. The way that the language service industry and like the way that we consume even content that comes from abroad has totally changed with the advent of good AI-based text translation. we haven't gotten there yet when it comes to having conversations. Like, we still both speak English on this podcast, rather than me speaking in Polish and you doing English. And I think at some point in time, this is gonna be changing. We've seen some demos from like the big players there. We're obviously running quite a bit of our own research on that, but bringing that to a product and like a usable way of and integrated everywhere, that is something that I'm really excited about. And I think from the perspective also from DeepL's history, that's going to be an important one for us.
I mean, if we do have like real time, like ubiquitous translation models for speaking, what changes happen in the world? Like, I'm sure you thought about this a lot. Like what does that world look like?
I think we'll really start thinking about the world in a different way, especially like on the business space. And I'm particularly interested here about the business space. I think that technology will be pretty quickly up to a level to be able to, for us not think really where we're located business-wise. Like, I'm going to do a tech startup here in Cologne and like get my co-founder in Tokyo and the other one in the US. And like, we're going to just be maybe potentially speaking in our own languages, and all of that is going to be happening in real life. But then also like really on scale for businesses, like for all of those businesses that are operating in different languages, giving employees access to education, learning resources, knowledge, doing that so much more easier. That's gonna help a lot. And while like it's gonna, like the AI, I think, is going to be able to bridge all of those gaps, I think there is still going to be, caveat, a lot of interactions where kind of the personal connection and the cultural aspect will kind of give a lot of value to learning those languages.
Yeah. I gotta ask, like, will kids learn languages in the future? Like, it seems inevitable we'll get to this kind of place at some point. I don't know when, but like, do you think in like 30 years kids are taking, that extra language in school?
Yeah, I'm asking mine to learn languages still. I think that goes back to, once again, like what you want to accomplish with languages and communication. I think like the world, through the fact that we're getting better and better translation capabilities, might actually go more and more into a mode where local languages are going to become more and more important, because you can still access the most common ones, but maybe it's not going to be as important for individual languages, for everyone to try speaking English. But then if you go back to like your private, your personal use cases, I think languages are going to be still incredibly important, and learning about cultures, like people love that for a reason. That makes a lot of sense. It's also like really good for our brain development when we're in school to learn languages. We're still learning addition and subtraction, although like computers are far better at that than any of us can ever be. And I think that will make a lot of sense. And you really don't want to talk to your partner through a phone for like the 20 years of your relationship. That just doesn't work.
Do you think so? I can see, like, do you think people will learn more or less languages in the future? Because obviously it'll probably be easier to, there'll be all sorts of tools to learn them. And at the same time, it's not going to be a business requirement, but to your point, more of like a personal and learning thing. So if you were to put a stake in the ground, like in 30 years, does the average person speak more or less languages?
I guess probably less, I have to say, but there's going to be more fun with that. I think those people that were going to do that, they're going to do that out of this kind of personal interest. And that goes back to like, why do people learn playing chess? I mean, it's fun, really. And I think languages are like so core to human beings. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement about that even in the future.
Yeah, I love the chess analogy, because I feel like it's so interesting. Obviously, we have, at this point, AIs are so much better at chess. And, it was like interesting at one point to, when they were neck and neck. And now, these AI chess bots can play each other, but people still really care about the human side of it and the learning. And also just there's something, there's something fun in the imperfections of it as well. Like the exact perfect version is not actually what people wanted.
Yeah, and it's an intellectual challenge that we have. Like, so much of what we're doing every day is actually for kind of capturing our interests and making sure that we have something that we consider valuable to do in our life. Like, thanks to technology, a lot of the less, like, at least in our countries, like, a lot of the kind of hassle has been already outsourced to technology. And I'm not only talking about AI, but like washing machines and stuff. So we can put more effort into things that just make us feel better.
Yeah. How close are we to these like synchronous speaking models? Like, I guess what year when doing this podcast are you going to be speaking in Polish and I'll be speaking in English and it will be seamless?
It's always really hard to speculate here, and thank you for putting me on the spot.
Like a good host is supposed to do.
I guess it's gonna take us a few years to get there. I expect early products to be out on the markets kind of pretty quickly, but kind of perfecting that. It took us a while for text, and spoken language is just so much more complicated. It's just like this. It's so stream based rather than really being chunked into sentences, and we speak so carelessly that the AIs are going to have much more trouble figuring out what we want to say.
On the technical side, do the main challenges feel, obviously there's tons of challenges around latency, and getting these speech models fast enough. Obviously, to your point, it also feels like there's more ambiguity in speech than there is in text. Like, any other technical challenges you think about that, hey, we'll have to overcome this before we get there?
Yeah, I mean, latency is an important part. You mentioned that, ambiguity, and just this different type of language even. Like, if you look at a transcription of a conversation, even if that was like a properly conducted conversation, I would say, rather than a wide brainstorm in front of a whiteboard, it's just so unstructured. The language is completely different. We're gonna have to teach the models to translate different languages, basically.
There's obviously some ancillary spaces to your world too. I think of like the voice dubbing space and, language learning apps. Like, what do you think of kind of what's happening in those spaces? And maybe just generally, like, what are the other spaces you pay attention to that are maybe like adjacent to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, language learning is pretty exciting, I think. That's nothing that we would focus on as a company, even though we hear from a lot of people that are actually using DeepL to learn new languages, just like as a teacher who can speak that language much better than them. I'm pretty excited about that technology because until now, it was really so expensive to learn to speak a language. Like, you had to have your in-person teachers, and learning a foreign language well, and especially like in the spoken variant of that, was a really privileged thing to do. I think that can change with the technology. You can really have fluent conversations with models. These conversations actually don't have to be fully accurate. I mean, it's meant for learning. So like a model which hallucinates a bit, that really doesn't matter at all. What is important is that you just get the ability to speak, express yourself, get a little bit of dialogue into that. I'm wondering a little bit about how enjoyable of an experience that's going to really be, because it's just so much more fun to go with somebody to a dinner and kind of try to learn the language over that, rather than speaking to your phone.
I love it. Well, we always like to end our interviews with a quickfire round where we get your take on a few questions. And so maybe to kick that off, what's one thing that's like overhyped and one thing that's underhyped in the AI world today?
That's super easy. Overhyped general models, underhyped specialized models. I mean, we've been talking about that for a while, but like, there's so much more attention to general models, but really the specialized ones is where the value gets created right now. So that's I think an important one.
Totally. What's been the biggest surprise like in building AI features in DeepL? Maybe like one thing that you thought would work that didn't, or one thing that you were like, I don't know if this is going to work, and it actually worked quite well.
Oh my God, that's not so easy. I think beating the tech giants that was a big surprise. I think having that pace and being able to deliver, and back then in 2017, before anyone else, I mean, we obviously betted on that. But was I sure that it's going to work? Probably not. And then when it comes to what didn't work, yeah, I think at the beginning, I thought really that the technology alone would be enough. That you just can build the tech, you put it out to the world. Maybe me being an engineer, there's an obvious thought to think. But then I've really noticed, and we've noticed that if you want to deploy this technology to people, you have to build more. You have to have the product, you have to have the commercials, etc., etc. Kind of considering the bigger picture is important.
What's something you've changed your mind on since building DeepL?
Okay, I'm going to come with a different angle here, more on the cultural aspects of running a company. I've become a big Radical Candor fan, kind of making sure that like you run a company through very direct, very open, very honest communication. And I haven't fully understood the power of that at the early stages there. But that's become very, very important to me.
Yeah. Was there like a turning point for you that got you there?
I think that was just a journey, and you notice like so often that you haven't been fully transparent, and how that has hurted both parties. Actually, so that was just like constant learning curve there.
Yeah. What AI startup like outside of your space are you most excited about right now?
I think you mentioned them at the beginning, Perplexity.
Yeah.
I think. Obviously, I'm feeling a little bit attached to them just because of the fact that they're a small player in a market that is dominated obviously by Google search. Like providing this LLM-based search, like what they're doing is great. I'm hearing so many people who are actually using that product, and to an extent, like this story is a little bit similar to what we're doing. So feeling a lot of empathy for them and doing that.
Yeah, the band of folks taking on the giants and constantly being asked about moats and defensibility and everything. I feel like you guys,
totally.
I assume there's like some get together where you guys can all commiserate over getting to ask the same damn question every time.
Yeah, we have some common investors, so we see each other quite often on those offsites, so we can discuss it.
Yeah. Well, if you hadn't started DeepL, and I guess like you were just in, obviously you're a very entrepreneurial person, like in this AI era right now. What other like completely different application would you go start if you were not at DeepL? Anything else pique your interest in what you can do with LLMs?
Yeah. I would go for medicine. And once again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't have a clue about that space really. But watching it, and my motivation for building tech is always to make the world a little bit better. And I hope, like with DeepL, we can do a small step towards that. But with medicine, like the possibilities are really so huge, and that will have so much impact on our lives. And it's not only like drug discovery, but like democratizing access to like medicine, to in general to doctors. That's going to change the world like really in a significant way, I think.
Well, it feels like, I mean, I don't know if you guys have healthcare customers, but like translation, obviously, and there's a whole medical translation industry in the US. And I think certainly the ability to translate, cutting edge research and clinical protocols, and even just communication between folks that speak different languages, it feels like you could really play a part in that. Yeah,
we do have like even at the front line, really, when you have like healthcare workers and you have people coming from different places, especially in Europe. That is a pretty common use case.
Yeah, it makes sense. What company do you think would be most interesting to just run AI at right now? If you weren't at DeepL?
Once again, easy, NVIDIA. Yeah. And that's not because of the stock, the equity. It's.
I assume it's to say that you can allocate all the GPUs to DeepL, right?
Yeah, maybe. No. I mean, I'm an engineer. Like building software is pretty cool, but hardware is even cooler. Like let's make that clear.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure there's all sorts of things folks will want to dig into. Where's the best place for them to learn more about you, DeepL? I'll kind of leave the last word to you.
Yeah. I would say, like, ask anyone who has experienced translation on a daily basis. Like, find an expert, find maybe a translator who is in your community. They will know DeepL by heart. I'm sure about that. So that's the best place. And I mean, this is how DeepL has really grown. Like, of this viral word of mouth. Marketing loops, kind of. Other than that, obviously, visit our website. You can test DeepL Translate and DeepL Write for free at deepl.com. You don't even have to sign up. It's just like go to the website and start off translating.
Yeah. How have you, it feels like you have so much translator love. Like, how have you navigated that? Because I imagine there's some narrative one could say, oh, AI is going to replace all this. And I feel like you've done a great job kind of building a great brand in that community. Any like learnings around that? I feel like lots of founders are dealing with that, where people love these hypey narratives of AI, replacing X.
I think people have just noticed in the industry that their work is going to be just so much more productive if they let the AI maybe do some of the more mundane part of that, and really adding value where value needs to be added. So a lot of kind of the usage has come from that, and then also like the amount of content that has been created over the last years and that people want to localize into all of the different languages, that has become so large. I think like humanity would just not be able to cope with that in a manual way. So it was a natural way of where this only could go.
Totally. Well, thanks so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you coming on the pod.
Jacob, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.